First thing I want to do is I want to run a little bit of an experiment on the audience. So I'm going to get everybody to stand up because we've just eaten, so we're at risk of going into a really big slump. Now, I would like all the women in the room to move to the right-hand side. So I'm your air traffic controller. And all the gentlemen, if you could move to the other side of the room, please. No, stay. Please, don't leave. Fantastic. I'm going to ask all of the women to sit down for a second, and if you're just at the front, you don't have to sit all the way down. Now, I actually asked a question. I was curious about the balance of women to men at this conference, and it feels 50-50. It felt really even. I'd like to get the gentlemen to sit down now, and if all the ladies could stand up. I was wrong. It's a really interesting fact. I think it's about 27 to 30%. When we see 27 to 30% of women, we assume it's a 50-50 balance. So that was a really interesting exercise. I think we might have more people than seats, so do your best to try and find one now that I've shuffled everyone up. And hopefully that will keep us awake for a couple of more minutes longer. It also gave the new people coming in a chance to get a seat as well. Okay. Oh, is that for me? No? Oh. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so I think we're all starting to settle into our seats again. Thank you for doing that for me. I started off in my Agile journey in 2008. I walked into an interview. I'd recently done an exam and read a really boring book on project management, and I thought, I'll just do this, I'm not sure if I can survive it, but I'll give it a go. I walked into the interview, and one of my questions were, actually I can't remember the question, it was about changing requirements, because in Waterfall it's a case of you don't change requirements, and they'd asked a question about that. And in an interview for Project Manager, I said, I have no idea what everybody's problem is. If the customer wants something different, give it to them. And their faces dropped. And I thought, maybe that's not the answer they wanted. But they actually gave me the job. And they brought me in, and the thing they said to me on the first day is, that was probably the worst interview we'd ever seen in our lives. You do not fit the role of a project manager. Can you go over here and work with this team that's learning Scrum? So I'm like, okay, we'll find out what that is. So here I am, 11 years later. I've never done project management, and I think that interview and getting that job saved me. One thing I learned in this team was I'd read a book on project management. I had to try and control and guide these people. I had to try and solve their problems for them. And I ended up finding out that was the worst thing I could do. And I've lived that mantra ever since. We had teams coming together trying to work in different ways, trying to interact with people in different ways. And I was trying to help them all the time. And what ended up happening is they let me. So I found that all of the burdens and all of the problems from these teams started to fall on my shoulders. And it was exhausting, and it was draining. And I learned the hard way during that project that the best thing I can do is to be quiet, ask them the question back, and get them to solve their own problems. And what we ended up doing is, over a period of 12 weeks, is we rebuilt a product that had been moved from one provider to a new provider. It made the company £20 million a year, and we ended up standing that up from end to end in a couple of weeks, once I learned to stop and stay out of everybody's road. What I'm doing now is I'm actually working with banks. They are organisations with a lot of problems, but problems I love to get involved in. I find that banks are a fascinating environment at the moment because all of them are looking at this agile journey. They're all starting on this agile journey, and they're all determined to do something good and do something new and something different. And then you hit management. Management want to do something different, but there's an awful lot of fear with them in letting go. And it was a little bit like me in my first job in Scrum in 2008. I learned quite quickly because I hadn't had 20 or 30 years embedded in me of trying to control people and trying to manage people. And in the end, I found out that if I actually just give them this story, it could help them let go a little bit. And it's working. At the moment, we have a person in our team who is a program manager. She's an extremely good program manager, and we've moved her into the role of Scrum Master. She's trying really hard to work differently. She's trying really hard to listen, and the team's giving her that space, but they're constantly coming to me with their problems and trying to get me to solve them. So does anybody have any idea of what position that puts me in? An honest position, but it also puts me in the road of the conflict all the time. So if you're trying to solve a team's problems all the time, you end up putting yourself into that position of being the main point of conflict. And people let you sit there because it's easier to pass the conflict on to you rather than actually stand up and say, I have a problem. So as leaders, one of the best things that we can do is coach people on solving their own problems. You need to create that dynamic environment. You need to create that conflict. And through that conflict, people actually find their own paths, their own journeys out. Some of the most creative teams I've had the pleasure of working with are ones that didn't get on. It sounds crazy, but they created their own conflict, and I stepped out of it. And as a project manager, ex-project manager for, I think, 2 weeks that I had that job, but as somebody who stepped into the role of the product owner on a very new product idea back in 2008, the creativity that came out of this team as they were learning through their norming, storming, performing stages was fantastic. The company actually ended up, it was during the recession, so there was a lot of fear in organisations and letting new teams do something new. Everybody was thinking about how do we protect the organisation? How do we make sure that we don't lose money? They actually let this team go off and experiment and trial and send a product out, and what we ended up doing was creating enough money to be able to keep the whole business afloat. So this all came through me not getting involved, not solving the problems for them. So I only have 5 minutes left. I don't want to keep talking. I want to ask, is there anybody in the audience who would like to call out a question or a challenge for me? Something that they maybe weren't comfortable with hearing, or something I didn't explain well enough? Yes.
That's not my issue.
Do we have a microphone, actually? Oh, how's this?
It's actually not my issue, but it was somebody asking me the same question, and I just wondered what your opinion might be. He was saying that he works with 2 teams, one of which the dynamics within the team is absolutely fantastic, and they almost know without speaking what the other person's thinking and how to do. And then he's got another team that the dynamics are far from perfect, so they're sort of almost tolerating each other, and he was sort of sitting between the two. In that sort of situation, how would you handle the team whose dynamics were being challenged?
So the team that was in conflict?
Yeah, I got the impression it wasn't quite so much in conflict, but just not gelling at all, not even going through that storming phase.
Yeah, I get them out of the office. I think one of the best success stories I had with a team that just wasn't forming well is not solving their problems, but the team was forced to work from home 2 days a week. And we found that having our sprint reviews and our retros and our planning sessions while half the team was online was very difficult. So we all had a working from home day. So we all organised to work from home on the same day, and we all came to my place. We had lunch together, we all made pizza together, we drank beer together, and it was probably the most honest retro the team had ever had. I think that the retrospective is the most valuable meeting a team can have. Even if you work in Kanban, for example, and you don't have a retrospective, find a way to build it in. This team and their ability to sit down in an environment that was outside of work, out of work clothes, having a couple of drinks together, having food together, created an environment that they just had really honest conversations. Every team is different, every individual is different. Some people are really introverted and it's very, very hard to get the information out of them. Sometimes another way to do it is to have a concept of a blind ballot. So let the team write down how they feel, even if they want to print it out because they're worried about people knowing the handwriting. Get them to put in a box. Pull all the information out, but don't solve the problems for them. Show the teams what the problems are and get them to solve them themselves. One of the greatest skills I think a Scrum Master can have is being that mirror for a team and just holding it in front of them so that the team can reflect back on themselves. That help? Any other questions? Do we have a... Do you want to try this one? I'll just come and sit next to you. Can I talk to this one?
Okay.
Thanks.
We'll make sure the next one's up in the back row, please.
Okay, so I have a question. I don't have a problem with resolving an issue with my team. I recently had an incident with another Scrum Master. We have to work within one art. We do safe. So, and we have to collaborate for the benefit of the product. So recently I had a conflict with this person because he had a name, he had a goal, and his goal was to get some information for his team from our team, and we couldn't provide that information, and he insisted on getting that information, and we ended up having a quarrel. And because I want to be in good terms with that person, because we're working together and we should be working together, I'm wondering how to end up in having, good communication with that person without having him to step down and me having to step down every time, or just clash.
Yeah. Have you tried any concepts of conflict avoidance? So, for example, we're working a model of SAFE in the bank that I'm in at the moment. And I found that when you have the PI planning event, do you know how you've got the section where you map all your dependencies together? The wall basically fell off because of the amount of red lines on it. I would be looking at the team's dependencies and thinking, if we've got a dependency on another team and we can't provide the information to them, do we need to carve up our teams differently? So why have we got dependencies?
Yeah, the issue was that we were working on a dependency, actually, but they came us in the beginning with one scope, and then they expanded the scope. So we were looking at a dependency, but something changed, and they just we couldn't get into terms with what could be delivered and what could not be delivered in terms of that dependency.
So the conversation that you've just had with me now, if you were to sit down and explain that to him in exactly the same way that you've done it, that to me opens up that whole conversation of a non-conflict way to resolve a problem. I think you've got a really good manner about you in trying to explain problems, and I would utilise that. I genuinely would.
Yeah.
Okay, 1 minute left. I probably don't have any time for any more questions. I am here for only probably about another half hour because I've got to run to the airport. I just want to say it's been a fantastic conference. Thank you for letting me speak. Thank you for asking a few questions, and thank you for letting me experiment on you at the beginning of this talk. Dzień dobry, Warszawa.